the most respected overclockers in the AMD community who have ever been. We have Brian McLaughlin, who is here, also known as Chew, and we have Sami Mäkinen, also known as Maki. Brian hails from Providence, Rhode Island, and Sami from Helsinki, Finland. These guys aren't the best because they're just smart. They work so hard to do this. Overclocking is one of the most undercompensated professional sports of all time. These guys have at times held, virtually every record that exists on AMD hardware, and they've worked their tails off to get there. And so we invited both of them to come down and do these tests, and so that's what they're doing here, which is yet another crazy science experiment, which I like to inspire and encourage us to do. So the experiment today has been, yesterday for the first time, we took FX under liquid helium, and we had done some initial testing, about a week before, on LN2, so it's really just the beginning. And we're trying to press as high as we can, and these guys work unbelievably hard and methodically to do that. So one of the first steps is we just do a basic electrical characterization, which is, instead of doing a database lookup on all the chips, we just run them through, make sure they work, and we get the stock VDD to stock voltage. We look for low stock voltage, we look for cool chips. We also look for voltage tolerance, and we'll also run them on LN2, the best of them, to see how high we can get. In initial testing, we were seeing frequencies on many chips. Maybe we tested 60 or so on air, and we just kind of cherry pick based on intuition and a little science, which are best. And we saw a large number that were able to run at 8 gigahertz on LN2. So that's really a testament to great scaling. The fastest any modern architecture CPU can scale is Phenom 2 at 7.2 gigahertz. Brian currently has the number 2 CPU-Z or pure frequency run in the world for Phenom 2. That's the fastest any modern architecture CPU can run. So what we're trying to do is see what we can do with AMD FX, and clearly it just blows that away. So we're not happy with that though, and the question is just how far can we go? So we do a few things. First, we start to mess with stuff and see if we can't get everything perfectly dialed in. And the other thing is we go colder. So you take heat out of the equation, and with liquid helium, you affect the conductivity of the silicon. And that's what we've done today. So we're going to try to run through a few trips that are going to really go over the next couple hours. We're going to be here till 2 a.m., at least tonight, doing this because it's fun. And it's not often you get such a great environment to be an overclocker in. So this is what we'll be doing, and we're going to take a chip right now on LN2. I think we're starting with the unknown chip, Sami?
Yeah.
We're starting with a question mark. We got a few other setups. Switching out these setups is a pain and very difficult to do in real time. But we're going to try our best to run through a few of these setups over the next hour. And Sami will be here. He'll be talking you through kind of where he's gotten. And we're going to attempt to push higher. I'm hopeful that we'll see some interesting results, and we'll see just how high we can go. But you have to realize that these guys are working very hard to get the last few megahertz out of these processors, and you never know what will happen. Sometimes the motherboard will fail. Sometimes we'll simply not have a good mount, despite having the best people in the world. Sami Mäkinen is a renowned AMD overclocker. He came to AMD overclocking graphics cards for ATI. So Sami has been properly called a Radeon overclocker for a very long time. Back in the day when water-cooled rigs were a big deal. So these days we've kind of stepped it up a bit. And it's really not that hard to step it up. Liquid nitrogen is pretty easy these days. When we run liquid nitrogen, it's kind of a preliminary test for us. And it's been overclocking for the rest of the world for a long time. But for us, it's just getting dialed in a bit. So Sami's going to run through some chips. We're going to start to go under LN2 if he likes his setup. And we'll let him run. Watching this sport, it can be like watching golf. or it can be like watching, you know, a pretty exciting speed race. It depends what happens and a little bit of luck, and we'll let it go. So, Sammy, what are you doing now, and what are you testing?
So we just got it started. Just setting some of the base settings from the BIOS. Default multiplier, basically. We crank up the rev clock because the CPU runs out of the multiplier. Okay. I'll try. Thank you. So we're just setting some of the base settings. Voltages from the BIOS, multiplier, rev clock. Because the CPU has such a good headroom, we actually run out of multipliers using the default rev clock. So I just adjusted it from 200 to 266 just to give that additional 30 megahertz or 30%. And just dialing some of the basics like DRAM timings, keeping the NB and HT-link speeds at safe settings, obviously memory as well. Particular ASUS board has some interesting options as far as the voltage regulation goes. So you can set things like load line calibration, basically, you know, adjusting the amount of voltage drop it takes during the load. So just dialing in all those settings first.
Charlie?
When you said you ran out of multipliers, is that a BIOS issue, CPU issue, or just something that needs fixing in the next system?
It's just the CPU is just, you know, overclocking too high. So
For what? I mean, is the limit on the CPU?
yeah. So 31.5 is the highest multiplier, but obviously, you know, that gives you like 6.3 gigahertz. So obviously, going beyond that, you have to adjust the rev clock. We've been running 266. That's been running fine. We haven't tried actually higher. Maybe Brian has, I don't know, but 266 been good for my testing. And obviously provides enough headroom to go beyond 8 gigahertz. Alright, so another minute and then we should be good with the BIOS settings. Let's start to cool it down, yes. So initially we actually let the cooler to heat up a little bit, just so the thermal paste gets to settle properly while we set up these basic settings from the BIOS. We feel it's hot enough to get it going on the overclocking now.
Sammy, did you already mention the types of temperatures that you're running at with both L2 and...
Yeah, so I mean, liquid nitrogen in general, it boils at negative 190 degrees Celsius. So that's basically the range where we run. We have a temperature probe at the base of this cooler, and we have a temperature meter there. So eventually it'll reach around negative 185, negative 187. That's typically the temperature for the cool unit. And so for the purpose of this overclocking demo, we've disabled all the power management features. We disabled thermal core, the onboard devices and that kind of stuff.
So Sammy, what frequency are you going to start off with?
We will boot up at like 4.8, so we boot up from the BIOS with pretty safe, easy settings, and then we'll adjust the frequencies on the fly, as well as the voltages. So ASUS is a pretty good utility, excellent utility actually, for dialing in the voltages, as well as those VRM settings.
Triple V, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that works really well.
So you mean even for extreme overclocking, once you set the base settings in the BIOS, you can pretty much do everything else in
Windows,
your
yeah,
operating system?
yeah. We've tried both methods. We've set everything from the BIOS. We pretty much see the same results. Just when we have a new chip, and we basically want to go, you know, step by